Welcome back to Storytime with Scott Boss. Today we're going to continue reading the Graveyard Gazette, starting at Chapter 3. Clifton Ridge was a moderate hike, more than Carrie's body was used to, but what the hell? He had time, and the view was great. The last time he'd come, Laura made them a picnic lunch at the top. They took in the view of the lake as they ate. This was at least 2 years ago in his memory, maybe more. He was definitely in better shape then. The trail was already covered in leaves, red, orange, yellow, and some good crunchy brown ones that crackled under Carrie's shoes. He was breathing hard, about 3/4 of the way up, leaning on a tree, equally happy he hadn't brought the cigarettes with him, and kicking himself, because having one at the top would be a relaxing way to finish the hike. Part of getting back in the habit was to remember to take them with you. After a few minutes, he continued up. The wind picked up and the cold was shooting through his thin jacket. A light drizzle spotted his clothes and it snuck through the thinning trees. Thankfully, there was still some cover. The trail was empty. So far, he'd only seen one older couple and a guy on a bike, but they were all headed down to the parking lot. It's almost like hiking just before dark during a cold drizzle wasn't everyone's idea of a good time. His pace would not allow him to get out before dark. He knew that now. He wasn't as conditioned as this as he used to be. He would have said fuck it and turned around and went back down, but there was another idea growing in his mind that propelled him on. Carrie's calves and thighs were burning when he felt the ground leveling out. He'd made it just at sunset and was at least satisfied with that. He approached the edge, holding a thin pine tree as his chest heaved up and down. The lake was gorgeous below him. The ledge was rocky and steep, hundreds of feet down to the shore. The sun on the horizon made a purple glaze in the clouds that a lot of painters attempted in local art classes. Carrie had a slight smile creep up on his face, only to feel his heart sink at the utter loneliness of his existence. Nice view, he thought. Who are you going to tell about it? Barnyard? Johnny? Michelle? They were work friends, sure. They all had their own lives. They weren't concerned with Carrie's day-to-day. That was all him. All him, all the time. Heaven knew Margie wouldn't be impressed with his view of the little lake. He could send her a picture and she'd probably say something polite, only to one-up it with a picture of the Atlantic Ocean or the Sphinx she'd be seeing tomorrow. He peered down, feeling the dizziness start as he held firm to the tree. They tell you not to look down for a reason, but Carrie couldn't look away. He embraced the woozy feeling, his whole life hanging on the thread of a few fingers. It felt good. The first step would be quick, tumbling, picking up speed. As if the rocks didn't do it, the lake would finish him off. He loosened his pinky and ring fingers, down to just his index and middle fingers, leaning further as he did. He could see all the way down. If he really let himself go, he might clear the edge enough to catch some air, soar for 20 or 30 feet before tumbling to his death. Is this what we're doing? Carrie thought to himself. No suicide note? Just do it? It would be better to think about it. Go to counseling or something. But for what? So they could put him on a drug that made him feel happy? May as well go now than do that for years before finally realizing he hasn't been living. Carrie took in a deep breath of the cool air. His fingers that held him felt numb. He could let go now and not even realize it. He focused his energy on the arm and hand and told his brain to send the command. Let go, he willed it. Let go. There was a tingling going up his arm, a slow response when he heard a snap that pulled him back to reality. He tightened his grip, all fingers back on the tree, and looked to the origin of the sound. There was a figure in the woods, on his left about 20 to 30 feet away, a person moving towards the view he'd been taking in from another vantage point. He pulled himself back in, shaken from his fantasy with the cliff. He couldn't help but watch. The movement was slouching, lurching towards the edge. The air was calm, almost no wind and little drizzle. Carrie watched the figure stop. Then he heard sobs, despairing sounds that even at the distance hit him deep in his stomach. He looked back to the ledge and the tree he'd been holding. Then he started walking. It took him a minute to cover the ground. It felt like a long one. He was silent as he could be, not sure why he felt right to sneak up on a crying person in the woods, but he did. The crying covered the noise of his steps, and soon he was on the same ledge. A woman stood a few feet away, her hands on her face as she faced the horizon. She had long dark hair and a slender figure covered with a thin jacket. He had a lot of questions, but wasn't sure if there was a proper time to reveal himself. Finally, her crying slowed, and he knew if she turned around, she would see him standing in the dark on a cliff just a few feet from her. "Excuse me," Carrie said in the softest, calm voice he could muster. Still, the woman jumped and turned around, holding out her hands like claws. "What? Who's there?" she said. Carrie held up his hands and stayed where he was. I'm just. I'm Carrie. I'm sorry. I heard you crying and it's dark and all. I just wanted to see if you're okay." He ended it like a question, hoping she would catch that and tell him just what he was thinking. That she was thinking about a sad movie or something and to go away. "Really? You're out here creeping around in the woods in the dark? Following me just to see if I'm okay?" "Well, Carrie started. "Does it sound like I'm okay?" "No, and it's none of my business, but I was just out here, and what were you doing out here?" Her arms were crossed. Carrie frowned, feeling defensive and not sure what an honest answer would be. "I could ask you the same thing." He saw her face drop and regretted his comment. Her hands were back up, covering as much surface area as they could. "I'm sorry." Carrie still didn't move from his spot, despite his natural instincts to try to comfort a crying person. For a second, it looked like she might reply, but then she would break back into tears. I wasn't," Carrie started. "I didn't mean to. Look, it's been a shitty day for me. Looks like it's not been your best day either." The woman looked up. Her hands were away from her face and her lips were pursed, as if holding back the next wave. "No," she said, "it hasn't." Carrie continued. "I just want you to know that I'm not some creep out here. I've had a day from hell and I just needed to get back out of the house before work. Thought maybe this view would help." "It's okay," said the woman. "I couldn't help but think." "Yeah, dude in the dark," said Carrie. "I get it. You're safe, I promise. I will totally leave right now if you want. Just tell me to go." Somewhere in her face he could see her telling him to go. Leave her in the misery. But he wanted her to say it. She shook her head. "You don't have to go." "Okay." He looked around. Most of the purple on the clouds had faded. "It's getting pretty dark. I'm the dummy that didn't bring a flashlight. Can I walk you back to your car, or—" The woman pulled out her phone and shook it a couple times. A bright light came on and Carrie shielded his eyes. "Well, that's pretty bright for a phone," he said. "I guess," she replied. "Doesn't yours have one?" Carrie patted his pocket. "Left it in the car. But mine definitely isn't that bright." The woman killed the light. The rain had stopped and the moon was peeking out from behind the clouds. "We can walk down," she said, looking back at the drop-off. I just... "It's a good view." Carrie eyed her cautiously. "Yeah," she sighed. "Hey," said Carrie at the same time, and the woman said, "Can I—" "Sorry," said Carrie. "Go ahead." "I'm gonna be honest with you." "Okay." I don't know you from anyone. Maybe it's better that way. You're not allowed to freak out, though." Carrie tried to keep his face stoic. "Okay." She started wringing her hands together as she spoke. "Before you got here, before I—" She moved from foot to foot like a kid that needed to pee. Carrie watched her face, but was pretty sure he already knew what she was going to say. "Oh, it's so fucked up." "I was going to jump," said Carrie out of the blue. She looked up at him, confused. "You what?" "Yes, like I said, I was having a shit day. Shit year, really. And tonight just felt right." "No," her face twisted, watching him. "Are you kidding? I'm sorry, you probably wouldn't kid about that. I just... What was your plan then?" She nodded grimly. "It's just—" she started. "Not working?" he finished. "Yes. Nothing. Whatever I do, I can't escape it." "I know." "Well, damn," she said. "We're a couple of fucked up people out here, aren't we?" Carrie laughed. It was a genuine soul-lifting laugh. "Yeah, we sure are." She reached out a hand. "I'm Angela, by the way." "Carrie." He met her hand. "I think I said that, but shit, what a way to meet." "Well, Carrie, should we talk about what got us up here, or save that for another night?" "I've got nothing going on. Well, I have work in a few hours, but that might be part of why I'm up here. Factory, you know." "Oh, which one?" "Glax Corp. Smoke detectors, rearview mirrors, exciting, soul-killing work." "Obviously." They both caught themselves laughing at the comment and stopped, a serious gaze between them. Can we sit? She asked. Yeah. They found a spot a few feet from the edge with little space between them. So, what about you? Carrie stretched out his feet. What, what's your soul-killing profession? Art. But really, that's what kept my soul alive. I teach at Madison Middle, that being our funding has been cut so low I can barely get them colored pencils and paper to work with. So that, Carrie started, and a flashbulb went off in his head. What had the paper said that morning? Something about an art teacher drowning in Lake Danner. He looked down and realized what lake was below them. Before he could say anything, she broke the silence. But that's not, Angela looked out. That's not why I'm up here. This is really hard for me. Carrie contained his wild thoughts. Is that truly what he had read in the paper? It's just like Barnyard's coach. No fucking way. There were more art teachers in the area, maybe, by the name Angela. Did that sound familiar? What was the painting of? I feel like I need to tell it from the beginning, she said. Is that? Carrie nodded. Please. Okay, but then you tell your story. I promise I'll listen. Okay, he caught himself almost smiling again. Carrie and Angela sat side by side looking out at the suicide cliff. It started with my stepdad, she said. I was 14 and my mom was at work. It was the summer and I was home from school, just hanging out. He pinned me to the couch like he wanted to wrestle, only we never wrestled before. We didn't have that kind of relationship. I asked him to get off at first, like an annoyed teenage girl. And then when he didn't, I saw the look in his eye, I got scared. I begged him to get off, but he wouldn't. She looked forward as she spoke, a couple tears catching in her eye but not slowing her down. He tried to bargain with me at first, telling me I was in trouble for not doing the dishes or something, and offering to let me off the hook if we could just play a little game. When I declined and told him to go ahead and tell Mom, he still didn't get off me. It was getting hard to breathe, and I was getting more and more scared. I told him I'd do anything if he'd just get off me. He let me up and led me to my bedroom, closing the door behind us. I stood by my nightstand and he told me to take off my shirt. I said no, that he was crazy, but he insisted, threatening to hit me if I didn't do what he said. I told him to call my mom and regretted going into my room in the first place, when our only phones were in the kitchen and their bedroom. He grabbed my arm, then hard. It felt like he could snap the bones in half if he just tightened a little more, and this time I did take off my shirt. He had let go and was smiling, looking me up and down, and then he said, "Pants too." When I refused, he hit me in the stomach. I could barely breathe and I started crying then, begging again, but just kept yelling at me to take off my pants. When I did, his hands were all over me, feeling me up and down, tugging on my underwear and bra, and then letting them snap back into place like a fucking cat toying with a mouse. I think you get the idea. He raped me that day, and the fucker even used a condom like he'd planned it all morning. I guess he had. I'd seen him look at me before, but never tried anything. That summer, he was off work more on and probably bored. I didn't dare to go anywhere afterwards. He was still in the house while I lay in my bed crying. I should have ran anywhere. I could hear him talking in the room he shared with my mom, but I didn't know what to do. Eventually, I built up the courage to call my mom. I snuck out to the kitchen to use the phone, but he'd come and sat on the couch, smiling at me. Your mom's gonna be mad when she gets home, he'd said. Better get those dishes done while you can. I spooked and ran back into my room, locking the door behind me this time. Later, when my mom got home, I ran out to greet her. She looked mad and told me we needed to talk. I said we did, but she said she'd go first. My stepdad sat there while my mom explained how he'd alerted her of the boy I had over while she was at work, how he'd heard us doing things in my room and had broken it up and sent the boy home. I almost lost my mind. I tried to defend myself, tried to explain it wasn't a boy, but that it was him. But my mom took his side. David would never hurt a fly, she'd explained to me, and how I needed to straighten out my behavior. You can imagine that wasn't the last time it happened. He pretty much had a green light from there. I tried to find things to do during the summer days, to avoid him at all costs, but he always found a way, once a week, once a month, for years. And he almost always used a condom, covering his tracks and not getting me pregnant. until he did. Carrie cringed. Her story was already so much worse than his own. He felt foolish for even being up here, but glad at the same time to be someone she could tell this to. I'm sorry, Angela said. This is a lot to be dropping on you. No, Carrie shook his head. It's your life. You need to tell it. Just do it. Get it out. Okay. She still looked out, not facing him, and continued. I was pregnant at 17. My mom, of course, thought it was from some boy I'd been sneaking around with, when the truth was I'd been afraid of boys at school, afraid they'd want to do what my stepdad was. I hadn't dated anyone. If I had any clue, I would have asked for a paternity test. I was so dumb. She held her head, gripping her temples as if squeezing out the mistakes of her past. You're not dumb, said Carrie. He was just fucking evil. Your mom should have saw that. Well, whatever. That part is in the past. I had my daughter, Maya, just before I turned 18. I pretty much had to tell the hospital I didn't know who the father was. Like I was such a whore I couldn't even remember all the guys I'd slept with. It did wonders for my self-confidence. Maya helped my relationship with my mom, and even though Mom didn't know the truth, Maya was our focus now. She made everything better somehow. Like she gave us a common ground to build a truce on, and once I got pregnant I became disgusting to Dave. I was thankful for that. Carrie nodded. He was happy to hear her life took a turn for the better, even with a teenage pregnancy, but he knew her story didn't end there. She was up on this cliff tonight for a reason, and he was afraid to hear why. Angela looked at him. For the first time in a while. I swear I'll wrap this up. Remember, you're next. She would have smiled if it were a different night, a different conversation. Please, take as long as you need. I hate to say my story is not as... Carrie paused, searching for the word. Eventful. Good. She assumed the position again, looking out. Maya was raised with my mom and my stepdad around. I needed all the help I could get. My mom still wanted me to get a degree. Any degree. Just don't be the teenage mother who drops out of school, she'd said. I'm glad for that. After high school, I went for my art degree because why the hell not? It was a degree, wasn't it? College was good, but I couldn't help but worry as my mom and David were generally the ones watching Maya. I told her to never leave Maya alone with him, and she promised me she wouldn't, only after another big argument, of course. But in the back of my head, college couldn't end soon enough, so I could stop relying on them and get the hell out. It was in my sophomore year that I came home one night, got Maya to sleep and jumped in the shower when I heard the bathroom door open. The fear shot up my whole body. He'd left me alone for so long I thought he was done with me. Only, it was like he was just waiting. Waiting for me to be less of a basket case. Waiting for my body to recover from having the baby or something. Maya was just over a year, and my stretch marks were minimal. Maybe he'd noticed that. But I tried really hard to cover myself up around him. I skipped breastfeeding and went straight to the bottle. I just couldn't imagine having to pull down my shirt, even to feed my own child with him around. I always locked the door, but that night I didn't think he was home. His car wasn't there. I don't remember if it was just in the shop or Mom borrowed it, but I do remember his shadow against the shower curtain. I wanted to scream, but the only one who would hear me would be Maya, and she'd wake up crying. The old memories came back and dragged me down. In my mind, there was nothing I could do. I told him to do what he had to do and just be quick about it. In retrospect, I should have pulled the shower curtain rod down and beat him to death with it. He agreed to the deal and went to unbuttoning his pants as I retreated to the place in my mind I've always used to hide during our visits, the depths of the ocean, where it was dark, so dark and quiet that you couldn't see or hear or feel anything. The next few years, he came after me, but less than he used to. I could thank Maya for that, I guess. He almost seemed like he was afraid of her. He had to know she was his daughter, but he looked at her like she was a demon, and I was fine with that. He still did it, though, and the fear was enough. Like when you know somebody's going to play a prank on you, and you're always looking around every corner for them. Always in the back of my head, I had the date, May 22, 1999, graduation. I wasn't waiting. Once I had that diploma, that magical college degree, I was taking what little money I had from waiting tables and stashing tips and getting the fuck out. I know, run from your problems. That's how I was raised, not to deal with them, just fucking run like a piece of shit, so that was my plan. With that goal in mind, I could put up with Dave for a while longer. Maya would be 3 by then. could get a job with my wondrous art degree and find a nice old lady that would watch her until she was old enough to go to school. Great plan, right? Well, graduation time came, and I think my mom knew. She obviously had been asking about jobs and things, and while I had been looking, I'd been looking out of state. I grew up in New York. I don't think I mentioned that. And I was shooting for any city far enough away that my shitty Volkswagen could take us, and David wouldn't find us. My mom asked all kinds of questions that I dodged the best I could. I almost felt bad lying to her, but deep down I couldn't help but blame her for trusting David over me. The day came, and I was going to walk, graduation that is, and Mom wanted to take Maya with her, but I insisted I'd hand her off when I got there. She agreed, but that might have been when I confirmed her suspicion. She told me her and David would be as close to the front as they could, cheering me on, really laying it on thick, like, you'd better be up there for when we do. I left before them, waiting around the corner with Maya, getting bored in her car seat as I watched their car finally pull out of the driveway. I went back to the house and grabbed all the stuff I'd packed the night before that I'd hidden in my closet. My car was full when I pulled out, my cap and gown laid nicely on my bed with a note. Dear Mother, Maya and I are taking off to have some time on our own. I really feel it's what's best for us right now. I will write when I can give you updates. Please give us our space. When I'm ready, we'll come back. Don't call the police. Don't come looking for us. Angela. It was awful and formal all at once, but not in the way you say goodbye to your mother. But in my case it was. We took off. I had a job interview in Norfolk, Virginia that coming Monday. It was a low-income elementary school in need of an art teacher that didn't pay much, but had a child care center directly across the street. It was as good as I could ask for. They must have had pity on me. The principal was an older lady that saw me as I got out of the car. Maybe she threw me a bone. I don't know. I know she didn't believe my story about my child care falling through at the last minute. She never said, though. Maya sat quietly for maybe the first time in her life, reading a Sesame Street book and from front to back, though she couldn't read yet. It's almost as if she knew how much hinged on me getting a job at that moment. They asked me about my education and discussed the difficulties the last teacher had experienced. It seemed like a job nobody wanted. It was the perfect job for me. This might have been the first time in life something worked out for me. Angela put her hands on Carrie's. My goodness, you're freezing. Oh, it's just, Carrie started. You weren't prepared for all this, were you? Well, no, were you? She laughed, and Carrie noticed for the first time that she was beautiful behind the paint on her face. She had soft pink lips to go with pale skin and dark hair. Her eyebrows gave her a sly, flirtatious look when she wasn't crying, that is. Angela's laugh went on longer than she probably meant to. Their emotions were high, and any little thing set them off like 3-year-olds that missed their nap. Carrie could see tears in her eyes again, but wasn't sure if they were from laughing or crying. Can I buy you a coffee? She asked. I could probably use one, Carrie rubbed his hands together. But you don't have to buy it. I can... No, it's the least I can do for you, saving my life. Is that really what happened? Maybe you saved mine. Maybe. Her eyebrows raised, and again, neither of them knew if they should be smiling or not. Nothing was appropriate anymore, so maybe anything was. Should we? She lit up her phone light, and they stood to begin their walk down. Casual conversation was not on the table at this point, so awkward silence filled the space as they went. Angela wasn't ready to finish her story through the hike. As they came to a large log, Carrie stepped over it onto a slick mud and on the other side and slipped onto his rear. Angela busted out laughing when he looked up into her light with an embarrassed smile. Oh dear, she said, hold on. She stepped over the log, gently feeling for firm footing before putting all her weight down. She put the phone in her teeth, flashlight straight up as she reached out her hand to help him. Carrie took her hand, and as she pulled, she didn't realize the grass she thought she'd stepped on was actually moss on a rock. Angela's feet went out, and as she went down in the mud, Carrie still holding her hands to prevent her head from smacking the ground as her phone flew from her mouth and made a cracking noise before the light went out. There was a pause before more laughter erupted. Carrie's muddy hands could barely pull her off the ground, but soon they sat side by side in the mud and in the dark, leaning their backs on a log that had started their demise. A fine pair we are, she said. Got that right. Carrie looked around, but under the tree cover could see next to nothing. I wonder where your phone is. I don't know, but I bet the screen is cracked again. Well, Carrie got onto all fours and searched the ground. I'm already dirty. What's the difference? Angela agreed, and after a minute or so, they came across her phone further down the path than seemed possible. It took a mudslide of its own and was not turning on. Bollocks, said Angela. Bollocks? Repeated Carrie. British now, are we? No, I just like their curse words better. Bloody hell, right? Bloody hell, yeah, I guess it feels good. Bloody hell, Angela yelled, cocking back her arm and chucking her phone off into the woods. Carrie looked at her with wide eyes as she smiled at him. What the bollocks did you do that for? Said Carrie. She laughed. We need to work on your British cursing. Then she looked off in the direction she'd thrown her phone. It felt good. It felt like I've been tied to that thing since I got it. I can never let go. You don't realize how much it weighs in your purse or your pocket until it's not there. And then you worry about it and what notifications you might be missing. Who gives a bloody fuck? Fair enough, said Carrie. We're out of flashlight now, though. We'll find our way down. We just gotta head down. All right. Carrie felt her right hand latch into his left. I won't let you fall again, she said, and they headed down. It took them longer than it would have in the daytime, but they found the parking lot. The moon highlighted their cars, the last two, directly next to each other. His Ford Taurus and her Honda Civic. They stopped between the cars. Is that you? Carrie asked. Yeah, and you? Angela replied. Yeah. She looked herself up and down and then him. Well, we can't show up to a diner like this, can we? Carrie shook his head. We'd even be underdressed for the Waffle House at this point. There was a pause as Carrie felt himself wobbling on his feet. His hour and a half of sleep that morning was catching up to him, and the weight of almost committing suicide also hit. You really need that coffee, don't you? She asked. Carrie shook his head to come out of the fog. Yeah, and a shower. She nodded and pursed her lips. Where do you live? Just off Garrett Road. You know, the water tower by Blythe? Angela thought for a second. Yeah, there's a park there, right? Right. So if you stand in my front yard, you can read the letters on the water tower. Nice view. Oh yeah, if there's ever a fire. I'm not too far from there, Angela patted her car. I could run home, shower, and then we could meet at that Starbucks on 25. Carrie nodded a sleepy nod. Angela looked him over. You're dead on your feet, then caught herself. Sorry, poor choice of words. He raised a hand. No problem. I'll be better when I get some coffee in me. If you don't fall asleep in the shower, what do you drink? You don't. Carrie stopped himself, realizing if she brought the drinks, she would probably be bringing them to his house. You get them, and I could pick them up and stop by if that's not too... Carrie thought for a second, then shrugged. He really wasn't in the mood to go back out in public. No, that'd be great. I'll pay you when you get there. Okay, so a drink and an address. Carrie gave her both, and they got in their cars. He watched her pull out of the parking lot and wondered what he'd just gotten himself into. Still, he was happy to be alive for the first time in a while. That's the end of chapter 3. We'll start on chapter 4 next week.